September 22, 1980. Khorramshahr, Iran. Dawn breaks over the Shatt al-Arab, but the morning light does little to soften the city's destruction. Smoke curls from burning buildings. The smell of gunpowder mixes with the stench of rubble. Streets once crowded with market stalls now lie empty, littered with debris and abandoned belongings. A column of Iraqi tanks rumbles toward the southern outskirts. Their engines roar, echoing off shattered walls. Soldiers clutch rifles and rocket launchers, faces tense, eyes scanning for resistance. From the rooftop of a half-destroyed building, an Iranian soldier grips his rifle, hands shaking, listening to the staccato of machine guns and the distant thump of artillery shells. He can see the city's defenses, makeshift barricades, sandbags, and a few brave volunteers armed with little more than courage. Civilians flee wherever they can, carrying what they can, praying they survive. A child cries in the dust. The roar of a shell breaks the morning silence. Concrete shatters. Flames rise. In an instant, everything changes. Khorramshahr is under siege, and the fate of the city hangs by a thread. In the late 1970s, the Middle East was a region of tension and uncertainty. Iraq, under Saddam Hussein, had emerged as a powerful state with ambitions that extended beyond its borders. Iraq's government, dominated by the Ba'ath Party, sought regional influence and control over vital waterways, particularly the Shatt al-Arab, the river that marked the southern boundary with Iran. This river was not just a border, it was a lifeline for oil exports, trade, and military movement. Control over it meant strategic and economic dominance. Meanwhile, Iran was reeling from its own revolution. In 1979, the Shah had been overthrown, replaced by the Islamic Republic led by Ayatollah Khomeini. The new government was still consolidating power, facing internal unrest and purges within the military. The Iranian army had suffered from leadership changes and a loss of experienced officers, many of whom were executed, imprisoned, or exiled. At the same time, the revolutionary government sought to export its ideology, heightening tension with neighboring countries. For Saddam Hussein, this appeared to be the perfect moment. Iraq had one of the largest and best-equipped armies in the region, with Soviet-built tanks, artillery, and aircraft. Iraqi intelligence believed Iran was weak, disorganized, and vulnerable to a swift attack. Hussein aimed to seize Khorramshahr and the oil-rich Khuzestan province, hoping to cripple Iran before it could fully stabilize. Iran, however, was not defenseless. Despite internal chaos, local militias, revolutionary guards, and regular army units were preparing for defense. Cities like Khorramshahr became fortresses in miniature, as civilians and soldiers worked together to reinforce barricades, prepare weapons, and organize patrols. The Iranian leadership knew that the first days of an Iraqi assault could determine whether the country could survive a larger invasion. The world watched quietly. Superpowers such as the United States and the Soviet Union were wary but hesitant to intervene directly. Regional powers monitored the situation, understanding that a major war in the Gulf could disrupt oil supplies and redraw borders. The stage was set, Iraq would strike first, and Iran would fight desperately to defend its territory. Khorramshahr, a city of around 150,000 people before the war, was about to become the center of the opening storm. Tensions had been building for decades. Border disputes, historical grievances, and competition over oil and trade routes created a volatile environment. Both countries believed their actions were justified. For Iraq, it was an opportunity to assert dominance. For Iran, it was a struggle to protect sovereignty and resist foreign aggression. The coming battle would test the limits of strategy, courage, and survival for soldiers and civilians alike. Khorramshahr's position on the Shatt al-Arab made it critical. If Iraq captured it quickly, they could push further into Iran and control access to the Persian Gulf. If Iran held the city, it could buy time to mobilize forces and resist the invasion. The importance of the city transformed ordinary streets into a deadly chessboard, where every building, alley, and bridge could become a battlefield. Military preparations reflected these stakes. Iraq concentrated armored divisions, artillery, and mechanized infantry for a rapid offensive. Iranian forces, despite shortages of modern equipment, focused on defensive ingenuity. Makeshift bunkers, booby traps, and barricades appeared in anticipation of the assault. Local knowledge of the streets and buildings became a crucial advantage for Iranian defenders, while Iraqi forces relied on overwhelming firepower and coordination. When the first shells fell on Khorramshahr on September 22, 1980, they ignited not only buildings but also a conflict that would last for months. The initial moments of the assault reflected years of political tension, preparation, and ambition. In that chaos, the lives of soldiers and civilians would be forever changed, and the city itself would become a symbol of resistance in a war that would claim hundreds of thousands of lives. Khorramshahr was more than a city, it was a prize. Located at the confluence of the Karun River and the Shatt al-Arab, it served as a major port for Iran's oil exports and imports. Controlling Khorramshahr meant controlling a gateway to the Persian Gulf, a vital route for global trade and energy. For Iraq, capturing the city promised both economic gain and a symbolic victory over its neighbor. For Iran, defending it was a matter of national pride and survival. Losing Khorramshahr could allow Iraqi forces to penetrate deeper into Khuzestan province, threatening oil fields and key infrastructure. The city itself was densely built, with narrow streets, residential blocks, industrial areas, and bridges crossing rivers and canals. Urban combat would be inevitable. Every building could serve as a defensive position, every alleyway a trap. Iranian commanders understood that conventional tactics might fail against a larger, better-equipped army. Instead, they prepared a layered defense, barricades reinforced with sandbags, hidden machine gun nests, and armed volunteers ready to resist at every turn. Iraqi forces, confident in their armored divisions and artillery, relied on speed and shock. Their strategy was to use tanks and mechanized infantry to break through the outer defenses quickly, then sweep into the city to secure key positions. Air support was limited but present, primarily for reconnaissance and to target fortified areas. The Iraqi command expected a rapid victory, assuming Iran's Revolutionary Army was unprepared for coordinated resistance. The human factor complicated these calculations. Khorramshahr's population included not just soldiers but civilians who refused to flee. Men, women, and even teenagers joined in the defense, armed with whatever they could find. Iranian commanders encouraged this participation, knowing that morale and determination could offset technological disadvantages. Makeshift militias supplemented regular troops, setting up barricades, ambushing armored columns, and guiding defensive fire from hidden positions. Geography worked both ways. The city's rivers and canals could slow Iraqi armored movements, but they also limited Iranian maneuverability. Bridges became choke points, artillery positions were vulnerable to air attacks, and the maze of streets made communication and coordination difficult. Commanders on both sides faced the challenge of directing troops in conditions that were chaotic, unpredictable, and deadly. Khorramshahr's symbolic importance also mattered. For Iraq, capturing the city would be a propaganda victory, demonstrating strength against a revolutionizing neighbor. For Iran, holding it, even temporarily, would show resilience and inspire resistance across the country. The city became a focal point for national identity and morale, raising the stakes beyond military strategy alone. By the eve of battle, the city was a fortress under tension. Iranian forces numbered in the tens of thousands, a mix of regular army units, Revolutionary Guards, and local volunteers. Their supplies were limited, but their knowledge of the terrain was extensive. Iraqi forces, slightly larger and better equipped, relied on mechanized units, artillery, and light air support to achieve rapid dominance. On September 21, 1980, both sides were poised. Iraqi troops gathered on the outskirts, tanks lined up for the dawn assault. Iranian defenders reinforced barricades, checked weapons, and prepared civilians for shelter or resistance. The air was thick with anticipation, dust, and the faint smell of diesel fuel. For months, political ambitions and military planning had led to this point. In a matter of hours, Khorramshahr would transform from a quiet, industrial port city into a battlefield of historical significance. The coming fight would test strategy, courage, and endurance. Iraqi commanders expected quick victories, relying on superior firepower and coordination. Iranian defenders relied on determination, urban tactics, and the hope that courage could withstand technology. In the streets of Khorramshahr, history was about to be written, not by generals and governments, but by the soldiers and civilians who faced the first shells, the first explosions, and the first screams of war. The first hours of the Battle of Khorramshahr were defined not by grand strategies or armored divisions but by the human experience of those on the streets. For the Iranian defenders, the fight was immediate, personal, and terrifying. Many were young men, barely out of their teens, members of the Basij militia, volunteers, or soldiers of the regular army. They had little training, few modern weapons, but a deep knowledge of the city's streets, alleys, and buildings. Their families often lived nearby, and their sense of duty was both patriotic and deeply personal. At dawn, Iranian soldiers manned makeshift barricades, listening to the rumble of approaching tanks. Each explosion or shelling caused the ground to tremble, sending clouds of dust and debris into the air. The deafening sound of artillery, the whistle of incoming rockets, and the sharp crack of rifles created a chaotic symphony. Soldiers shouted orders, guided civilians to shelters, and checked their ammunition. Fear was constant, but so was determination. Retreat was not an option. Every street held strategic importance, and the knowledge that a single mistake could cost lives kept nerves taut. Iraqi soldiers faced their own trials. Many were seasoned, trained in mechanized warfare, and equipped with T-55 and T-62 tanks, artillery, and support vehicles. Their strategy depended on rapid movement and overwhelming firepower. Yet urban combat was unlike the open plains or deserts they had trained in. Narrow streets forced tanks to slow down, making them vulnerable to ambushes and Molotov cocktails. The heat, dust, and smoke limited visibility. Even experienced commanders struggled to maintain order as their units advanced into a labyrinth of burning buildings and hidden defenders. Communication was critical but fragile. Iranian forces relied on runners, radios, and visual signals to coordinate defense. Iraqi units used radios, but interference, damage, and confusion in the smoke-filled streets caused delays. Orders sometimes arrived too late, forcing soldiers to improvise on the spot. Decisions were often split-second, whether to hold a building, retreat to a safer position, or risk exposure to target enemy tanks. Each choice carried life or death consequences. The psychological strain was immense. Soldiers faced exhaustion from days of preparation, interrupted sleep, and constant vigilance. The sounds of artillery, screams of the wounded, and sight of destroyed homes and fellow soldiers tested their resolve. Yet, small victories, holding a street, disabling a tank, rescuing civilians, provided moments of hope that sustained them through the chaos. The civilian fighters were another layer of the story. Fathers, brothers, and even teenagers joined defensive squads armed with rifles, hand grenades, and homemade explosives. Their contributions were unpredictable but effective, slowing the Iraqi advance and creating opportunities for Iranian units to regroup. Civilians also carried water, ammunition, and messages between units, risking their lives to keep the city's defense alive. In contrast, Iraqi troops had to manage the fear and fatigue of moving under fire in unfamiliar urban terrain. Tanks could be destroyed by hidden anti-tank teams, infantry ambushed from above, and supply lines cut off. The roar of engines masked but did not erase the anxiety of entering a city where every corner could hide an enemy. Many soldiers relied on strict discipline and training to keep fear at bay, moving as units rather than individuals, relying on numbers and firepower to push forward. Every day in Khorramshahr became a test of endurance. Soldiers on both sides learned quickly that urban warfare was not about strength alone. Knowledge of terrain, adaptability, courage, and the ability to act under extreme stress determined survival. The clash of human determination and military might create a battlefield where ordinary men faced extraordinary circumstances. By the end of the first week, the stories of soldiers' experiences, both Iranian and Iraqi, began to define the battle. Tales of bravery, exhaustion, fear, and improvisation would later be recounted in military reports and survivor accounts. They revealed a truth about war: It is experienced not in maps or orders but in the streets, homes, and hearts of those who fight. Khorramshahr became a city where strategy and human will collided in its narrow, dusty avenues. The Battle of Khorramshahr was as much a test of leadership as it was of soldiers' courage. On both sides, commanders faced uncertainty, high stakes, and decisions that would determine the fate of thousands. For Iraq, Saddam Hussein and his generals aimed for a swift victory. Hussein personally monitored preparations, insisting that Khorramshahr fall quickly to secure access to the Persian Gulf and establish momentum for a larger invasion into Iran. Iraqi commanders divided their forces into armored brigades, mechanized infantry, and artillery units. The plan relied on speed, coordination, and concentrated firepower. Tanks would break the main defensive lines. Infantry would follow to clear buildings and secure streets. Artillery and limited air support would suppress resistance. This strategy reflected Iraq's confidence in superior numbers and equipment. However, it underestimated both the resolve of Iranian defenders and the challenges of urban warfare. Narrow streets, canals, and bridges slowed movement, making Iraqi units vulnerable to ambushes and guerrilla tactics. Iranian leadership faced a different challenge. The military was fractured after the revolution. Experienced officers were scarce, many imprisoned or executed, leaving a mix of revolutionary guards, basic militias, and regular troops to coordinate defense. Commanders had to improvise, often relying on local knowledge, volunteers, and civilians. Leadership was decentralized. Street-level commanders made decisions independently while attempting to follow broader strategic directives from higher command. The Iranian strategy emphasized resilience and delaying tactics. Commanders understood that even a prolonged defense could buy time for reinforcements and strategic adjustments. Barricades, hidden firing positions, and improvised explosives were all part of a plan to disrupt Iraqi advances, channeling tanks into predictable paths where they could be attacked. Commanders also had to maintain morale among troops and civilians alike, reminding them of the city's symbolic importance and the consequences of failure. Communication was a critical leadership challenge. Radios often failed under fire, orders were delayed, and commanders sometimes relied on messengers running through dangerous streets. In one instance, an order to withdraw from a compromised position arrived late, forcing units to fight in untenable conditions. Conversely, a timely instruction to reinforce a barricade allowed defenders to stop an Iraqi advance for several hours. Leadership decisions in such moments directly shaped the battle's ebb and flow. Both sides faced the unpredictability of human behavior. Iraqi commanders expected disciplined movements and precise execution. Iranian leaders relied on volunteers acting on initiative and courage. Each decision carried high stakes. A misjudged maneuver could expose soldiers to enemy fire or allow a street to fall, opening the city to rapid occupation. Conversely, well-timed reinforcement or an unexpected counterattack could stall the opponent for hours, giving precious time for civilians to evacuate or troops to regroup. Strategic priorities also guided decision-making. Saddam Hussein aimed to secure Khorramshahr quickly, fearing that prolonged engagement could drain resources or embolden Iranian resistance elsewhere. Iranian commanders, in contrast, prioritized holding key streets, protecting civilians, and inflicting maximum attrition on Iraqi forces. This difference shaped the battle's intensity. The Iraqi assault was aggressive, fast-moving, and heavily mechanized. Iranian defense was adaptive, improvised, and deeply rooted in knowledge of the city. The psychological aspect of leadership cannot be overstated. Commanders witnessed casualties, destruction, and the strain on soldiers and civilians. Maintaining composure while making life-or-death decisions required discipline and focus. On both sides, small errors compounded quickly, hesitations could be fatal. Yet decisive, informed action, reinforcing a barricade, ordering a counterattack, redirecting artillery, had the power to alter the battle's course, even if only temporarily. By the end of the first days, leadership decisions on both sides had already left marks on the city. Iraqi forces, despite superior firepower, were slowed and frustrated by unexpected resistance. Iranian commanders, improvising with limited resources, had successfully delayed the assault, demonstrating the impact of leadership under extreme pressure. In Khorramshahr, the human mind, its decisions, foresight, and adaptability proved as decisive as tanks or artillery. The battle showed a central truth about warfare: technology and numbers can give an advantage, but leadership, often unseen and uncelebrated, is what converts potential into results. In Khorramshahr, every order, hesitation, or improvisation shaped the city's fate and the experience of every soldier and civilian within it. The Battle of Khorramshahr was defined by a stark contrast between human determination and the destructive power of modern weapons. Iraqi forces entered the city with tanks, artillery, and mechanized infantry. Their armored divisions included T-55 and T-62 tanks, supported by BMP-1 infantry fighting vehicles. Artillery units fired high-explosive shells into the city's outskirts, aiming to crush resistance before soldiers even reached the streets. Limited air support, mostly reconnaissance helicopters and fighter jets, monitored the battle, targeting key defensive positions. Iraq relied on its superior firepower to quickly overwhelm Iranian defenses. Iranian forces faced a different reality. Their arsenal was fragmented after the revolution, with shortages of modern tanks, artillery, and aircraft. Instead, they relied on ingenuity, urban knowledge, and improvised weapons. Molotov cocktails, small arms, light machine guns, and anti-tank rockets became critical tools. Civilian volunteers supplemented soldiers, using homemade explosives and traps to halt the advance of Iraqi armor. Iranian forces also used sniper positions in buildings, ambushes along narrow streets, and hidden barricades to maximize the effect of limited weaponry. Urban warfare magnified the importance of each weapon's role. A tank, powerful in open fields, became vulnerable in narrow streets. Artillery, while capable of leveling buildings, could not precisely target hidden fighters, sometimes causing collateral damage that endangered civilians or defenders. Light weapons, improvised explosives, and anti-tank missiles became decisive in slowing mechanized units. Every corner, alley, and rooftop could serve as a firing position, forcing Iraqi troops to adapt quickly or face losses. The technological gap created both challenges and opportunities. Iraqi tanks could destroy walls and vehicles, but they were slow to maneuver through debris and barricades. Iranian fighters exploited these vulnerabilities, placing explosives near bridges and intersections to channel tanks into kill zones. Even limited weaponry could have a strategic impact when used with knowledge of the terrain. A single anti-tank rocket could disable a vehicle, block a street, or stall an entire unit. Small arms were equally important. Iranian soldiers and civilians carried AK-47s, RPG-7s, and pistols. Precision fire from hidden positions created fear and disruption among advancing Iraqi infantry. Snipers targeted officers, while machine guns suppressed enemy movement along key streets. Ammunition shortages forced improvisation. Soldiers shared bullets, repaired weapons, and reused explosives. Every shot carried meaning. In a city under siege, a single weapon could shape the flow of the battle. Communication technology played a critical role. Radios allowed commanders to coordinate movements, request reinforcements, and report positions. Yet in the chaos of urban combat, signals were often disrupted by debris, smoke, or enemy jamming. Messengers ran through dangerous streets to deliver orders, bridging gaps when technology failed. The reliability of these systems often determined whether a unit held its position or was overrun. Logistics and supply lines were another form of technology. Iraqi forces depended on armored convoys for fuel, ammunition, and medical support. Iranian forces, lacking large-scale mechanized logistics, relied on local supply points, civilian networks, and rapid redistribution of resources. Trucks, carts, and even human couriers transported weapons and supplies through alleys and side streets. Technology was not just about weapons. It included the ability to move, sustain, and adapt under fire. By the second week of fighting, it became clear that the battle was as much about how technology was used as what technology was available. Iraqi firepower was formidable, but Iranian ingenuity, knowledge of terrain, and improvisation neutralized many advantages. Weapons were tools, yes, but their impact depended on tactics, adaptability, and human creativity under pressure. Khorramshahr demonstrated that urban warfare reduces some technological advantages while amplifying others. Heavy armor, artillery, and air support are powerful, but only when combined with careful planning, local intelligence, and flexibility. Light weapons, improvised defenses, and civilian participation can slow, disrupt, or even defeat a technologically superior force. The battle became a complex interaction of steel, fire, and human will, each side testing the limits of what their weapons and their soldiers could achieve. In the Battle of Khorramshahr, intelligence and reconnaissance played a silent but decisive role. For both sides, knowledge, or the lack of it, could determine life and death. The city's complex urban layout, narrow streets, canals, and industrial zones made conventional reconnaissance difficult. A single misjudgment about enemy positions could turn an advancing column of tanks into a death trap or leave civilians exposed to artillery fire. Iraqi forces relied on pre-war intelligence gathered through aerial reconnaissance and spies. Maps showed streets, bridges, and key buildings, and commanders assumed that Iranian defenses were weak after the revolution. Reconnaissance helicopters and scouts were deployed ahead of advancing troops to identify barricades, ambush points, and artillery positions. Yet the intelligence had gaps. Iranian defenders had moved troops and supplies covertly, constructed hidden barricades, and camouflaged firing positions. Streets that appeared clear were often rigged with explosives or snipers waiting in rooftops. On the Iranian side, intelligence relied heavily on local knowledge and improvisation. Civilians reported enemy movements, identified weak points in Iraqi formations, and guided units to strategic positions. Revolutionary Guards coordinated with local militias to monitor Iraqi supply lines and communication hubs. Even limited use of radios allowed commanders to adjust defensive plans based on reports from the front. Improvised intelligence networks became a force multiplier, turning civilian observation into actionable military information. Misinformation also shaped the battle. Iraq occasionally misread Iranian troop movements, assuming resistance was weaker or concentrated elsewhere. False signals and feints by Iranian units diverted Iraqi columns into ambushes. These tactical deceptions were low-tech but highly effective, demonstrating that intelligence is not only about gathering data but also about interpreting it correctly. Conversely, Iranian forces sometimes overestimated Iraqi strength, leading to cautious maneuvers that slowed counterattacks but also prevented unnecessary losses. Interception of communications added another layer. Iraqi units occasionally intercepted messages from Iranian forces, gaining insight into defensive positions or reinforcements. However, disrupted signals, radio jamming, and the chaos of battle often rendered this intelligence incomplete. On the Iranian side, commanders had limited access to the full Iraqi order of battle. They relied on observation, experience, and local reports to predict enemy movements. Every decision carried uncertainty. The urban environment magnified the impact of intelligence and reconnaissance. Knowledge of hidden passageways, abandoned buildings, and defensible positions allowed Iranian forces to concentrate limited resources effectively. Iraqi units, despite superior technology, were vulnerable when entering unfamiliar streets where intelligence was imperfect. Every ambush, every blocked street, every destroyed tank reflected a battle of information as much as firepower. Timing was critical. A single reconnaissance report arriving late could lead to an exposed column or failed assault. Conversely, timely intelligence allowed defenders to reinforce positions, evacuate civilians, and inflict significant casualties. Both sides had to constantly adapt, updating their plans based on fragmented, sometimes contradictory, information. By the end of the first week, the battle had become a war of eyes and ears as much as of weapons. Iraqi forces relied on reconnaissance to maintain momentum. Iranian defenders relied on intelligence networks to survive and hold key positions. The battle demonstrated that even in a conflict dominated by tanks and artillery, information could shape outcomes as dramatically as firepower. Decisions made based on what was known or misunderstood turned streets into traps, buildings into fortresses, and improvisation into strategy. In Khorramshahr, intelligence and reconnaissance were not glamorous, but they were vital. Every report, observation, and intercepted message influenced the decisions of commanders and the actions of soldiers. The success or failure of units often depended not on the size of their weapons but on the clarity, accuracy, and timing of the information guiding them. In the chaos of urban warfare, knowledge became as deadly a tool as any rifle, tank, or shell. The civilians of Khorramshahr were caught in a war that transformed their city into a battlefield overnight. Streets they once walked to school or markets became trenches and ambush zones. Homes and shops turned into defensive positions, rubble-strewn alleys became death traps, and canals and bridges, once used for trade and travel, became choke points for advancing tanks. For ordinary residents, survival became the central concern, even as patriotism and resistance inspired many to fight alongside soldiers. Families fled when the first shells fell, carrying whatever possessions they could. Some escaped across rivers by boat, others moved toward less exposed neighborhoods. The chaos was total. Smoke blocked vision, artillery shook the ground, and the cries of the wounded filled the air. Water and food were scarce, and medical care was nearly impossible to access. Children, the elderly, and the sick suffered the most. Yet many refused to leave. They barricaded themselves inside buildings, turned basements into shelters, and did what they could to assist the defenders. Civilians played multiple roles. They acted as messengers, carrying critical information between defensive positions. They transported ammunition, food, and water to frontline fighters. Women helped reinforce barricades, set up field hospitals, and calm terrified children. Men armed themselves and joined makeshift militias, fighting from rooftops or ambush points in narrow alleys. Even teenagers took part, carrying rifles or guiding soldiers through the city they knew better than anyone else. Their involvement blurred the lines between combatants and non-combatants, transforming the city into a total war zone. Fear was constant. Every explosion threatened death or injury. Every tank or advancing soldier represented immediate danger. Civilians lived with the knowledge that any street could be mined, every doorway could hide a sniper, and every bridge could collapse under artillery fire. Yet, alongside fear, there was determination. Many saw the defense of Khorramshahr as a duty, a way to protect family, home, and national honor. Ordinary people became part of the battle, their courage shaping events on the streets. The psychological toll was immense. Families witnessed the deaths of neighbors, friends, and relatives. Buildings that once held memories of life and community were reduced to rubble. Children were traumatized by the constant noise and danger. The city's everyday rhythm, schools, markets, prayers, and celebrations, was replaced by vigilance, firefights, and improvisation. Even as the city burned, people adapted. They learned which streets were dangerous, which buildings offered shelter, and how to move supplies under fire. Survival required courage, quick thinking, and an acceptance of constant risk. Civilians also influenced military outcomes. Their reports on enemy movements helped Iranian commanders plan ambushes. Local knowledge allowed defenders to navigate streets, canals, and alleyways efficiently. Acts of bravery, like rescuing wounded soldiers or blocking enemy paths with rubble, slowed the Iraqi advance. The defense of Khorramshahr was not only a military operation but a collective effort of the population, combining armed resistance, logistical support, and moral determination. The humanitarian crisis was severe. By the end of the first week, thousands of residents were displaced or trapped. Access to food, clean water, and medical care was limited. Fires and shelling destroyed neighborhoods, and entire blocks became uninhabitable. Survivors had to rely on makeshift shelters, improvised medical care, and each other. Yet even in these conditions, communities tried to maintain some semblance of order. Civilians organized relief efforts, shared resources, and assisted the wounded. Their resilience became a backbone of the city's defense. By the time the battle concluded, civilians had endured weeks of fear, destruction, and displacement. Their contribution to the defense was invaluable, demonstrating how urban warfare transforms not just soldiers but entire populations. Khorramshahr's streets, buildings, and canals were more than battlegrounds. They were the lived space of human courage, suffering, and endurance. The city's residents experienced war in its most immediate and personal form, shaping events as much as any tank or artillery shell could. In Khorramshahr, the line between civilian and soldier was blurred. Ordinary people carried the weight of the city's survival, taking risks, fighting when necessary, and providing crucial support to the military. Their stories reveal the human cost of war, the endurance of spirit, and the unpredictable ways in which courage can influence a battle. The city became a symbol of both destruction and resistance, defined as much by its people as by the soldiers who fought in its streets. September 22, 1980, at dawn. The Iraqi offensive on Khorramshahr began with a deafening roar. Tanks rolled across the southern outskirts, engines shaking the ground beneath them. Artillery units fired shells into the city, reducing buildings to rubble before infantry advanced. Dust, smoke, and fire filled the streets, turning visibility to near zero. The assault was meant to be swift, a decisive strike that would secure the city and open the path to the Persian Gulf. Iraqi commanders divided forces into multiple columns. The main armored units aimed for the city center, while infantry brigades were tasked with securing bridges and key intersections. Artillery targeted the outer defensive lines, hoping to weaken barricades and cause chaos among defenders. Air reconnaissance provided real-time updates, but the chaotic urban environment often made intelligence unreliable. Every street, canal, and alley could hide a deadly ambush. Iranian defenders had prepared for this moment. Barricades lined the streets, sandbags reinforced key intersections, and snipers occupied rooftops. Makeshift explosives were hidden in rubble and along likely tank routes. Revolutionary Guards and Basij volunteers manned defensive positions alongside soldiers, ready to resist at any cost. Civilians helped move supplies, guided fighters through alleys, and provided intelligence on Iraqi movements. The city itself became part of the defense, with terrain, buildings, and canals shaping the battle. The first contact was brutal. Iraqi tanks fired shells into barricades, obliterating structures but often exposing themselves to counterattacks. Iranian anti-tank teams fired rockets from hidden positions, targeting the tracks and engines of the armored vehicles. Machine gun nests and sniper fire forced infantry to slow down, reducing the momentum of the Iraqi advance. Urban combat nullified some of Iraq's numerical and technological advantages. Tanks, effective in open fields, struggled in narrow, debris-strewn streets. Every intersection was a potential trap. Communication challenges intensified the chaos. Iraqi commanders relied on radios, but static, damage, and smoke interference caused delays. Messages were sometimes misunderstood or received too late, leading to units entering exposed areas. Iranian forces, using runners and signals, adapted quickly. Small, improvised intelligence networks relayed enemy positions and guided reinforcements, allowing defenders to exploit weaknesses in the assault. As the day progressed, the city became a maze of explosions and gunfire. Streets were blocked with rubble, bridges became contested points, and buildings collapsed under artillery fire. Civilians who had stayed behind huddled in basements or improvised shelters, witnessing the destruction and the courage of defenders. Young volunteers fired rifles from rooftops, while trained soldiers coordinated movements to protect critical points. Every hour, the human cost mounted. Wounded and dead piled up, buildings crumbled, and the air filled with smoke and dust. Iraqi forces adapted to resistance by committing more troops and firepower. They attempted flanking maneuvers, tried to isolate strong points, and targeted supply lines. Yet Iranian defenders, familiar with the streets and canals, countered with ambushes, hidden explosives, and sniper fire. The assault slowed, no longer the rapid, overwhelming strike Iraqi command had envisioned. Momentum was disrupted, and the city became a grinding, bloody struggle. By evening, the battle had already consumed hundreds of lives. Iraqi troops held some areas on the outskirts, but Iranian defenders retained control of critical streets and key intersections. Civilians and fighters alike were exhausted, yet the fight continued. The first day of the Iraqi assault demonstrated the limits of firepower when confronted with determined, urban resistance. Khorramshahr was no longer a simple objective, it had become a fortress under siege. The Iraqi assault revealed both the strengths and weaknesses of leadership and strategy. Tanks could destroy barricades, but they could not clear streets without heavy losses. Artillery could flatten buildings, but it could not eliminate hidden defenders. Speed and firepower were insufficient against preparation, knowledge of terrain, and human resolve. In the streets of Khorramshahr, every move required calculation, courage, and adaptation. The first day set the tone for what would become a prolonged, intense struggle. Soldiers and civilians alike understood that victory would not come quickly. The battle had shifted from a swift offensive to a test of endurance, strategy, and sheer will. The streets were alive with conflict, every corner contested, every building a potential trap, and every soldier and civilian a participant in a struggle that would define the course of the war. By late September 1980, the battle for Khorramshahr had become a desperate struggle. The city, once bustling with trade and life, was now a landscape of rubble, fire, and chaos. Iraqi forces pressed their attack, determined to break through the Iranian defenses. Tanks advanced cautiously, infantry moved street by street, and artillery pounded barricades with relentless force. Despite exhaustion and losses, Iranian defenders refused to yield, using every tactical advantage the city offered. The southern districts were the first to fall. Heavy Iraqi artillery and concentrated tank fire destroyed barricades and demolished buildings, forcing defenders to retreat to inner streets. Iranian forces adapted, setting up new positions in industrial zones, residential blocks, and along canals. Every street became a choke point, every building a stronghold. Ambushes slowed Iraqi advances, destroyed vehicles, and inflicted casualties. Yet, despite their determination, the defenders could not replace lost supplies, reinforcements, or weapons. The city's resources were stretched to the limit. Civilians continued to play a crucial role. They carried water and ammunition, guided fighters through safer routes, and provided intelligence on enemy movements. Yet they were also casualties of the siege. Fires, collapsing buildings, and artillery strikes took lives, injured hundreds, and left thousands displaced. The human cost was staggering. Streets once filled with children and merchants were now graves of steel, concrete, and despair. Iraqi commanders adjusted tactics to overcome resistance. Flanking maneuvers, coordinated artillery barrages, and concentrated infantry assaults eventually broke through some inner defensive lines. Tanks moved in tighter formations, infantry cleared buildings methodically, and artillery targeted strong points that had stalled the advance. Gradually, the northern and central districts came under Iraqi control. The city's fall, however, was not immediate. Every step forward cost the attackers heavily in both manpower and material. The final hours were marked by intense, close-quarter combat. Iranian fighters used explosives, sniper fire, and Molotov cocktails to delay the inevitable. Streets became killing zones, buildings turned into traps, and bridges were destroyed to slow tank movements. The fighting was brutal and chaotic. Both sides suffered heavy casualties, but Iraqi persistence, combined with numerical and technological superiority, tipped the balance. By September 24, 1980, Khorramshahr had largely fallen to Iraqi forces. The city was devastated, residential blocks destroyed, factories in ruins, streets littered with rubble and the remains of soldiers and civilians alike. The fall of Khorramshahr was a significant strategic victory for Iraq, giving them control over a vital port and a direct path deeper into Khuzestan province. For Iran, the loss was a painful blow, both militarily and symbolically. Yet the defenders' courage and resilience had delayed the Iraqi advance, buying precious time for reinforcements and reorganized resistance. The aftermath of the city's capture highlighted the human cost of urban warfare. Thousands of civilians were killed, wounded, or displaced. Infrastructure was in ruins. Hospitals, schools, and homes had been destroyed or damaged beyond repair. For Iraqi troops, the victory came at a high cost, hundreds of soldiers killed or wounded, tanks damaged or destroyed, and morale tested by the ferocity of resistance. For Iranian forces, the battle became a story of heroism and sacrifice, a symbol of resistance against overwhelming odds. Khorramshahr's fall also had immediate strategic consequences. Iraqi forces gained a critical foothold in Iran's oil-rich province, threatening supply lines, industrial zones, and other urban centers. Iranian commanders, while forced to retreat, used the lessons learned in the city to strengthen defenses elsewhere. The battle demonstrated that even a technologically superior force could be slowed, frustrated, and inflicted heavy losses in urban environments when faced with determined defenders. The city itself, scarred and shattered, became a testament to the intensity of modern warfare. Streets, bridges, and buildings bore witness to the struggle, each mark of destruction telling a story of courage, desperation, and human endurance. The fall of Khorramshahr did not end the war, but it marked a turning point in the Iran-Iraq conflict, influencing military strategy, morale, and the broader course of the conflict. In the end, the Battle of Khorramshahr revealed the brutal reality of urban warfare: destruction, sacrifice, and courage intertwined in a contest where every decision, every action, and every individual mattered. The city's streets, once quiet and ordinary, had become a crucible, forging stories of heroism, suffering, and the unyielding human spirit. When the smoke finally began to clear over Khorramshahr, the full scale of the destruction became evident. Streets that had once teemed with life were now littered with rubble, burned-out vehicles, and debris from collapsed buildings. Homes, markets, and factories lay in ruins. Fires smoldered across neighborhoods, sending plumes of smoke into a sky still streaked with the orange glow of artillery blasts. The city's infrastructure, water, electricity, communications, was nearly non-existent. For survivors, the devastation was immediate and personal, the loss of shelter, family, and the familiar rhythms of daily life. Casualties were staggering. Thousands of civilians had been killed, injured, or displaced. Streets were marked by the remnants of lives interrupted by war. For Iranian defenders, the toll was severe. Regular army units, Basij volunteers, and local militias had fought heroically but suffered heavy losses. Entire units were wiped out or forced to retreat. Hospitals, already overwhelmed by the injured, struggled to cope with the scale of casualties. Doctors and nurses worked tirelessly under makeshift conditions, treating burns, gunshot wounds, and trauma with limited supplies. For Iraqi forces, the victory came at a high cost. Armored units lost tanks to anti-tank rockets, explosives, and improvised defenses. Infantry brigades suffered casualties from sniper fire, ambushes, and street fighting. While the Iraqi command had anticipated some resistance, the intensity and duration of the battle exceeded expectations. Reports from the front highlighted delays, logistical challenges, and the exhaustion of troops who had fought for days in brutal urban conditions. Victory had been achieved, but it had not been easy or without consequence. Civilians bore the psychological impact of the battle as heavily as the physical. Survivors recounted nights of terror under artillery fire, the constant fear of being trapped, and the trauma of witnessing family members, friends, and neighbors killed or injured. Children, in particular, experienced fear and confusion, their lives disrupted in ways that would leave lasting scars. The immediate aftermath was a city in chaos, where survival depended on finding shelter, food, and medical care. The retreating Iranian forces regrouped outside the city, assessing losses and planning next steps. Despite the fall of Khorramshahr, their resistance had delayed the Iraqi advance, providing valuable time for reinforcements and preparations in nearby towns. Strategic lessons were quickly analyzed. Urban warfare demanded flexibility, intelligence, and coordination beyond what conventional military tactics often assumed. Officers documented the successes and failures of barricade placements, anti-tank strategies, and civilian participation for future operations. Iraqi commanders consolidated control of the city, securing key infrastructure, establishing checkpoints, and repairing critical roads and bridges. However, maintaining control required constant vigilance. Sporadic resistance from hidden Iranian fighters, sabotage, and the challenge of restoring order amidst ruins forced Iraqi units to stretch resources and adapt to urban insurgency tactics they had not anticipated. Even in victory, the battle left them wary of the unpredictable nature of urban combat. The fall of Khorramshahr sent ripples through Iran and Iraq alike. In Iran, the loss was demoralizing, yet the story of defenders' courage began to spread. Newspapers, radio broadcasts, and personal accounts emphasized the determination of soldiers and civilians who had resisted overwhelming odds. For Iraq, the victory was hailed as a strategic achievement, a testament to military planning and firepower, but it came tempered by the recognition of the heavy losses and prolonged resistance they had faced. Immediate consequences extended beyond the battlefield. Essential services were disrupted, trade halted, and thousands were displaced. Refugee flows strained surrounding towns, creating humanitarian crises that required rapid relief efforts. Medical teams, volunteers, and local authorities mobilized to provide food, shelter, and basic care, often under continued threat from residual fighting or unexploded ordnance. In sum, the immediate aftermath of Khorramshahr reflected the cost of urban warfare. Physical destruction, human suffering, and military losses defined the city's landscape. Yet even amid devastation, lessons were learned, resilience was displayed, and the seeds of future resistance and strategic adaptation were sown. The city had fallen, but its story, the courage, sacrifice, and endurance of its people, had already begun to shape the narrative of the Iran-Iraq War. The fall of Khorramshahr had consequences that extended far beyond the city's ruined streets. Militarily, it gave Iraq a strategic foothold in southern Iran. Control of the port and access to the Shatt al-Arab allowed Iraqi forces to move deeper into Khuzestan province and threaten vital oil fields and industrial centers. The city's capture also served as a psychological blow to Iran, demonstrating that even urban fortresses could fall under a sustained assault by a determined, mechanized army. For Iran, the battle became a symbol of resistance. Despite the loss, the defenders' ability to delay the Iraqi advance by days, inflict significant casualties, and demonstrate ingenuity under pressure resonated across the country. Iranian military leadership studied the fight carefully, using the lessons from Khorramshahr to strengthen defenses in Abadan, Thoas, and other threatened cities. Strategies shifted to emphasize urban fortifications, local militias, and coordination between civilians and military units. The psychological effect of organized resistance, even in defeat, became a cornerstone of Iran's approach to the war. The humanitarian consequences were severe and long-lasting. Tens of thousands of residents were displaced, moving to surrounding towns or rural areas. Families lost homes, livelihoods, and possessions. Reconstruction would take years, and many neighborhoods remained in ruins throughout the war. Psychological trauma among survivors, particularly children, left deep scars. Witnesses of the battle recalled screams, explosions, and the loss of loved ones, experiences that shaped entire generations. Relief efforts were organized under difficult conditions, often delayed by continued fighting or the destruction of roads and infrastructure. Politically, the fall of Khorramshahr reinforced Saddam Hussein's initial ambitions but exposed challenges in occupying urban centers. While Iraqi forces controlled the city, they faced ongoing resistance from remnants of Iranian troops, irregular militias, and civilian sabotage. The battle revealed that holding territory required more than initial success. It demanded continuous effort, resources, and adaptation to guerrilla-style urban resistance. These lessons would influence Iraqi strategy throughout the early years of the war, including supply line protection and coordination between armored, infantry, and support units. Internationally, Khorramshahr highlighted the escalating intensity of the Iran-Iraq War. Neighboring countries, superpowers, and international observers noted the heavy casualties, urban destruction, and civilian suffering. While the conflict did not yet draw direct intervention, it affected regional security, oil prices, and global perceptions of Middle Eastern stability. The battle underscored the human and strategic costs of modern urban warfare and foreshadowed the prolonged, bloody nature of the Iran-Iraq conflict. Culturally, Khorramshahr became a symbol of both devastation and courage. Stories of young volunteers, civilian contributions, and the steadfastness of the city's defenders circulated widely. Monuments, books, and later documentaries commemorated the struggle, ensuring that the city's defense remained a reference point in Iranian collective memory. The battle demonstrated that even in defeat, the determination and sacrifices of ordinary people could inspire a nation and influence morale for years to come. Strategically, the lessons learned in Khorramshahr influenced subsequent battles. Iran shifted toward defensive depth, emphasizing fortified urban positions, coordinated civilian military efforts, and the use of guerrilla tactics to disrupt mechanized advances. Iraqi forces, while initially confident, had to adjust plans, allocate more troops for urban control, and account for logistical vulnerabilities revealed during the city's capture. The battle became a case study in urban warfare, highlighting the complexities of combining armor, infantry, artillery, and local intelligence in dense city environments. The war would continue for years, with Khorramshahr remembered as both a tragic loss and a testament to resistance. Its fall demonstrated that urban warfare magnifies human courage, exposes logistical and tactical limitations, and exacts an enormous toll on civilians and soldiers alike. Yet, the endurance of defenders and the adaptability of Iranian forces left a lasting imprint on military thinking and the conduct of the war. Khorramshahr's streets, bridges, and neighborhoods, though devastated, stood as a symbol of the human costs of conflict, the challenges of modern urban combat, and the enduring resilience of those who face war with courage and determination. The longer-term impact of the battle reached beyond immediate strategy, shaping military planning, civilian morale, and historical memory for decades. The Battle of Khorramshahr did not end the Iran-Iraq War, but it revealed profound truths about the nature of modern conflict. The city's destruction, the staggering casualties, and the heroism of its defenders showed how urban warfare tests every facet of human and military capability. Technology, training, and numbers mattered, but so did knowledge of terrain, improvisation, and determination. Tanks could crush walls, artillery could level buildings, yet human courage and strategic adaptability could slow, disrupt, and even challenge superior forces. For soldiers, the battle was a trial of endurance and courage. For civilians, it was a test of resilience, resourcefulness, and sacrifice. Every street, bridge, and building in Khorramshahr became a stage where ordinary people confronted extraordinary danger. The defenders' efforts demonstrated that even in the face of overwhelming odds, resistance can impose costs, delay an enemy, and shape the course of a conflict. Strategically, Khorramshahr reshaped approaches to urban combat. It highlighted the limits of mechanized forces in dense cities, the importance of intelligence and reconnaissance, and the critical role of civilian participation in defense. Lessons learned here influenced both Iranian and Iraqi tactics in subsequent battles, underscoring that every action, every barricade, ambush, or decision can ripple through the larger war effort. The city itself became a symbol. Its fall was a blow, but its defense was a story of courage and resilience that endured in the national memory. Khorramshahr reminds us that war is not only about objectives and territory, it is about human experience, suffering, and determination. The smallest decisions, the bravery of one soldier or civilian, can echo far beyond the immediate moment. Khorramshahr stands as a reminder of the cost of conflict and the complexity of modern urban warfare. It shows that even in devastation, lessons are learned, courage is witnessed, and history is written not just by leaders or generals, but by those who endure, resist, and survive. The echoes of its battle continue to shape understanding of warfare, strategy, and the resilience of the human spirit. If this story of Khorramshahr moved you, consider diving deeper into history. Share this documentary to honor the courage of those who fought and suffered. Subscribe for more cinematic, historically accurate accounts of modern warfare, where every battle tells the untold human story. Comment below with the moments that struck you most, and let us know which battles you want to explore next. History is not just in books, it's alive in stories of courage, sacrifice, and resilience. Be part of keeping these lessons alive. Hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story from the front lines of history. Every view, every share, and every discussion helps us bring these untold stories to life.